I'm terribly surprised, and I'm terribly grateful to the Academy, and I'd just like to thank everyone, and I'd like to thank my two families, the Waltons and the Thomases. Thank you very, very much.
The Waltons ran for 9 seasons on CBS from 1972 to 1981 and built its entire reputation on one idea, that a family stays together through the hardest things. Every episode ended with the same ritual: lights going out across the farmhouse, voices calling goodnight to each other in the dark, a whole country sitting with that warmth long after the television clicked off. But here is what those goodnight scenes never showed. Behind the cameras, the family kept fracturing. Actors left under circumstances that ranged from medically devastating to deeply personal to professionally complicated. Some of those stories have never been fully told, and the one that started the whole unraveling is not the one most people expect. The star who walked away from the best role he'd ever have. Richard Thomas was 21 years old when he first played John Boy Walton, the eldest son of the Walton family, an aspiring writer growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia during the Great Depression. The character was the show's emotional spine, the narrator, the dreamer, the one the audience followed most closely through the family's Depression-era life. Thomas played him from the very first episode in 1972, and within a year, he had won a Primetime Emmy Award for the performance. By 1973, he was one of the most recognized young actors on American television, which is exactly when the doubt started setting in. Thomas was a trained stage actor who had studied at Columbia University before his career took off, and he watched his contemporaries building film careers that seemed to exist on an entirely different plane from weekly family television. The longer he stayed on the Waltons, the more he worried about something specific: that John Boy Walton was becoming the only role people could picture him in. That the warmth of the character, the gentle narrator voice, the soft-spoken mountain boy with a journal, was slowly becoming a professional ceiling he couldn't see over. By the end of Season 5, in 1977, he had made his decision. He told producers he would not be returning for Season 6. The show's writers handled the departure as gracefully as they could. John Boy moved to New York City to pursue a writing career, which was consistent with the character's established ambitions and didn't feel forced. The door was left deliberately open, in case Thomas eventually changed his mind. He didn't change his mind right away. What happened after he left is where this story becomes genuinely instructive. Thomas did solid theatrical work on Broadway, which suited his stage training. But the film career he had imagined, the one that was supposed to justify leaving a hit show at the height of its popularity, never fully materialized. He took film roles and television movies through the late 1970s and into the 80s, but nothing carried the same cultural resonance as John Boy. Nothing connected with audiences in quite the same way. The producers faced a practical problem during his absence. They couldn't leave John Boy's storyline permanently dangling, and they eventually recast the role, bringing in actor Robert Whiteman to play John Boy for the 8th and 9th seasons. Whiteman was a capable performer and handled the material competently, but the character never recaptured the same centrality it had held under Thomas. The show adjusted around the absence, shifting more narrative weight onto other Walton children and storylines, but longtime viewers felt the difference immediately. When the Waltons began producing reunion television movies in the 1980s, Thomas came back. He returned to play John Boy, alongside surviving original cast members across multiple specials, and he has been candid in interviews across the decades since about what that experience taught him. He has acknowledged, with the kind of clarity that only comes from distance, that he had genuinely underestimated what the show was when he was inside it. He had been so focused on what it might be preventing him from doing that he hadn't fully reckoned with what it had actually given him. The role wasn't a cage. It turned out to be the foundation on which everything else in his career was built on. And walking away from it at 26, while the show was still at the height of its popularity, remains one of the more instructive examples of how difficult it is to accurately assess what you have when you're standing in the middle of it. The grandfather America loved, and the life they didn't know about. Will Geer played Grandpa Zebulon Walton from the very first episode of The Waltons, and for most of the American viewing public in the 1970s, he was simply the warm, weathered, endlessly quotable patriarch of the mountain, a man who seemed to have been born old and wise, who sat on the porch and told stories and represented something stable in a country that didn't always feel that way during those years. What the audience watching him every week did not know was that the man playing their beloved grandfather had spent years of his professional life being systematically destroyed by the United States government. Will Geer had been a prominent actor and activist since the 1930s, deeply embedded in left-wing political causes during the Depression era. He was a close personal friend of Woody Guthrie, the folk singer. He had been involved in labor organizing and civil rights causes at a time when such involvement carried serious professional and personal risk. When the House Un-American Activities Committee began its investigations into communist influence in Hollywood in the late 1940s, Geer's name appeared prominently. In 1951, he was called to testify before the committee. He refused to cooperate. The consequence was immediate and severe. Will Geer was blacklisted. He was effectively banned from working in mainstream Hollywood, shut out of film and television at the moment when those were the most powerful cultural platforms in the country. For more than a decade, he worked wherever he could find work, on stage, in small venues, in community theater, anywhere that would have him, while the industry he had spent his career building a place in pretended he no longer existed. The blacklist began loosening in the 1960s, and Geer slowly found his way back into screen work. By the time the Waltons cast him as Grandpa Zeb in 1972, he was in his late 60s and had been through an experience that would have destroyed many people. The man sitting in that rocking chair each week, telling Depression-era stories about resilience and community and holding things together, had actually lived through something that tested those values in ways the Walton family's fictional hardships never approached. There is a particular irony embedded in that. The show that became one of American television's great celebrations of decency and community was anchored in part by a man who had been professionally punished for more than a decade for his commitment to exactly those things in real life. Will Geer continued playing Grandpa Walton through the end of Season 5. He died on April 22, 1978, at the age of 76, during the show's production period. His death meant the series had to address Grandpa Walton's permanent absence, which it handled by having the character die between seasons, a decision that honored the reality without forcing the production to manufacture a farewell episode for a man who had simply not survived to film one. The tributes from his castmates were genuine and specific. Michael Learned, who played his daughter-in-law, Olivia Walton, described the sense of loss that followed his death as something the remaining cast felt in every scene they filmed afterward. His political history became more publicly known as the decades passed and the blacklist era received proper historical reckoning. What had once been used as a professional death sentence was eventually re-examined as one of the more shameful chapters in American institutional history. Geer himself, during his lifetime, had carried that history without visible bitterness, which is its own remarkable quality. He had lost years of his career to a system that punished him for his convictions, found his way back, and then spent his final years playing one of the most beloved grandfathers in American television history. The show was significantly better for having him. And his story, once you know it, adds a layer to every scene he appeared in that doesn't go away. The Emmy-winning grandmother and the stroke that stopped everything. Ellen Corby arrived on the Waltons playing Grandma Esther Walton with a sharpness and a dry wit that balanced Grandpa Zeb's warmth with perfect precision. She had been a character actress for decades before the role came to her. Her film career stretched back to the 1940s, and she had received an Academy Award nomination for her work in I Remember Mama in 1948. By the time she joined the Waltons, she was in her early 60s and had long professional experience, exactly what kind of character she was building and how to protect that character's integrity across a long run. The audience responded immediately and stayed connected across every season. Grandma Walton became one of the show's most quotable, most beloved presences, a woman who could deliver a single look that said everything a full scene of dialogue couldn't. Ellen Corby won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for the role in 1973, 1976, and 1977, a level of sustained recognition that reflected the consistency of what she was doing on screen week after week. Then, in November of 1976, during the production of Season 5, Ellen Corby suffered a severe stroke. She was 66 years old. The stroke significantly affected her speech and mobility, and her ability to return to the demanding schedule of a weekly drama series was genuinely uncertain. The show's creators faced a decision about how to handle her absence. They made a choice that was, particularly for that era of television production, genuinely thoughtful. Rather than quietly recasting the role or having Grandma Walton conveniently visit distant relatives indefinitely, they wrote the stroke directly into the show's storyline. Grandma Walton suffered a stroke on screen. The Walton family's response to that, the fear, the adjustment, the slow and incomplete recovery, became part of the show's ongoing narrative. That decision meant Ellen Corby's real medical situation was acknowledged rather than hidden, and her eventual return to the set was built into the story in a way that felt earned rather than arbitrary. She did return, beginning with Season 7, though her appearances were reduced compared to what they had been before the stroke. The physical effects of what she had been through were visible in her performances, but the production worked around those limitations with genuine care. She continued appearing on the show through its final seasons and returned for the reunion movies that began airing in the 1980s. What that whole period reveals about the culture of the production is worth sitting with. The Waltons regularly depicted a family that responded to hardship with practical compassion rather than denial. And the decision to write Corby's stroke into the story rather than pretend it hadn't happened was a small act of creative integrity that aligned the show's real behavior with the values it broadcast every week. That alignment doesn't happen automatically. Someone had to decide that's how it would be handled. 4 Emmy Awards, and she still walked out the door. Michael Learned came to the Waltons in 1972 playing Olivia Walton, the mother of the family, and she transformed what could have been a functional supporting role into something considerably more complex and durable. Olivia was patient and deeply principled, and sometimes quietly exhausted in ways the show allowed to show on screen. A woman navigating the specific pressures of Depression-era motherhood with a faith and a stubbornness that felt genuinely human rather than sentimentalized or idealized. The television industry consistently recognized what she was doing. Michael Learned won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a drama series 4 times for the role in 1973, 1974, 1976, and 1979. 4 Emmy Awards for the same character on the same show across a 7-year span is a level of sustained recognition that very few performers in the history of American drama television have ever matched. And then, after season 7, she left anyway. The reason she has given across various interviews over the years is honest, and, once you hear it, completely understandable. She was exhausted. Not exhausted by the character specifically, and not exhausted by the people she worked alongside. She has consistently spoken about her castmates and the show itself with genuine warmth across all the decades since. But 9 to 10 months of demanding production every year, for 7 consecutive seasons, had worn her down in a way that 4 Emmy statuettes sitting on a shelf could not compensate for. She wanted to do other work. She wanted a life that wasn't entirely consumed by a production schedule. She wanted to be able to choose. The show wrote her departure by giving Olivia Walton tuberculosis, a disease that required the character to leave the mountain and go to a sanitarium for extended treatment. It was a story solution that preserved the character's dignity, gave the absence a reasonable explanation, and left the door open for Learned to return when she was ready. She did eventually return for later episodes and for the reunion movies that followed the series, but the specific weight that Olivia Walton had carried as the emotional and moral center of the family didn't fully redistribute across the rest of the cast in her absence. Something particular about the show's texture changed. What's instructive about Michael Learned's departure, especially when placed alongside Richard Thomas's, is how different the underlying motivations were. Thomas left chasing something larger, a film career, a more creative range, the fear of being permanently defined by a single role. Learned left to recover something that the show had gradually consumed: time, energy, the basic capacity to be a full person outside a production schedule that had absorbed 7 years of her life. Both of those are legitimate reasons to leave, but they point toward 2 genuinely different ways that a long-running, successful show can cost its performers something that never appears in the credits or the ratings. The original mother who never got to play the role. Before Michael Learned ever set foot on the Walton farmhouse set, another actress had already been cast as Olivia Walton. Her name was Patricia Neal, and in 1972 she was one of the most celebrated dramatic performers in Hollywood. An Academy Award winner for her role in HUD in 1963. An actress whose work carried a quality of deep interior life that very few performers managed as consistently. Earl Hamner Jr., who created the Waltons based on his own Depression-era childhood, growing up in Schuyler, Virginia, had specifically wanted Neal for Olivia. She had a quality he believed the role demanded, something grounded and weathered and quietly formidable that could anchor an entire family without overpowering anyone standing alongside her. The problem was what Patricia Neal had survived in the 7 years before the show began casting. In February of 1965, while she was pregnant with her 5th child, Neal suffered 3 massive strokes in rapid succession. She was 39 years old. The strokes left her partially paralyzed, significantly affected her speech and cognitive function, and placed her in a recovery process that her husband at the time, the writer Roald Dahl, helped manage with a demanding and unconventional rehabilitation program. Her recovery was described by medical professionals who followed the case as genuinely remarkable. She returned to acting and received an Academy Award nomination for The Subject Was Roses in 1968, a performance that demonstrated both how far she had come and how much the process of getting there had cost her. By 1972, Neal was working again, but the specific demands of a weekly television drama series, the pace, the volume, the need to deliver consistent, reliable performances across hundreds of pages of dialogue every production season, were beyond what her health could realistically support. She withdrew from the Waltons before filming began. Michael Learned was brought in to replace her. The show that 9 seasons worth of American viewers watched every week, the show built around Michael Learned's specific interpretation of Olivia Walton, was built on a role that had been originally written and cast for someone else. The Waltons that actually existed was a different version of itself than it would have been, a version shaped in large part by a medical catastrophe that had nearly taken Patricia Neal's life 7 years before the cameras started rolling. Neal went on to work in film and television through the 1970s and beyond, demonstrating throughout those years that her talent had not been taken from her by what she had survived. But she never played Olivia Walton. The version of the show that might have been built around her performance remains one of American television's most significant alternate histories, something real enough to have almost happened, and just different enough from what did happen to be genuinely worth thinking about. The youngest Walton, who chose a classroom over a media career. Kami Cotler played Elizabeth Walton, the youngest of the 7 Walton children from the very first episode of the series through its entire 9-season run. She was 6 years old when the show began and 15 when it ended, which means she grew up almost entirely on screen, in front of a national audience, playing a character defined by childhood innocence at the exact moment when her own childhood was quietly disappearing into production schedules and call times and the particular kind of public attention that follows a beloved family show. Most child actors who come out the other side of a long-running series face the same basic challenge. The industry that shaped their entire professional identity during their formative years has very specific ideas about what they should do next, and those ideas rarely include walking away from it entirely. Kami Cotler walked away entirely. After the Waltons ended in 1981, she did not go looking for the next role, the next series, the next opportunity to stay visible. She went to college. She pursued education with the same deliberateness that most of her castmates pursued their next project. And she eventually became a teacher, a choice that requires a particular kind of conviction when you are making it from the specific position of someone who grew up as a recognizable face on one of the most watched family dramas in American television history. She has spoken in retrospective interviews about that choice with a clarity that is striking precisely because it contains no visible ambivalence. The industry she had spent her entire childhood inside did not represent what she wanted her adult life to look like. Teaching did. So she taught. What makes her story worth sitting with, especially in the context of everything else that happened to the people around her on that show, is how uncomplicated the decision appears to have been for her. No failed comeback attempt, no gradual fading, just a clean, considered exit from a world that most people in her position would have found very difficult to leave. The musical Walton, who let the music lead him away from acting. John Walmsley played Jason Walton across all 9 seasons of The Waltons, and if you watch the show during its original run, you know exactly which one Jason was. The musical Walton. The one with the guitar and the piano, and the particular quietness that comes from someone who processes the world through sound rather than language. The character's musical gifts were written into the show's fabric from the beginning, which was not accidental. Walmsley was a genuinely trained musician before he was an actor, and the show leaned directly into that. What the weekly audience watching Jason play guitar on the farmhouse porch could not have known was that the tension built into the character, between staying on the mountain and chasing something the mountain couldn't contain, was not entirely fictional. Walmsley had real musical ambitions that existed independently of the show, Ambitions that the demands of 9 months of annual television production made genuinely difficult to pursue at the level he wanted. He stayed through the entire run. Unlike Richard Thomas, he did not leave mid-series to test what waited on the other side. But after the show ended in 1981, his path made clear where his real investment had always been. He moved toward music composition and production work, rather than continuing to pursue acting roles, building a post-show career that had far more to do with what Jason Walton loved in the scripts than with the industry that had given Walmsley his platform in the first place. His post-show trajectory is genuinely different from almost every other cast member's, specifically because it doesn't read as an exit from anything. It reads as a return to something that had been waiting. The show gave him visibility. What he did with that visibility was walk steadily back toward music, which had always been the actual work, and let the acting career that came with 9 years of national television simply recede behind him without apparent regret. What staying really cost, and what the whole story reveal. The Waltons asked something of its cast that most television productions don't explicitly name, but that everyone involved eventually comes to feel. It asked them to be, week after week, across 9 years of production, the embodiment of something the American public wanted deeply to believe was real. A family that held together through genuine hardship, that kept its values intact under sustained pressure, that chose each other consistently even when the choosing required something real. That is a significant thing to carry for 9 months of every year, year after year, for the full run of a long series. Ralph Waite played John Walton Sr., the father of the family, across all 9 seasons, and his experience with the production carries its own specific weight. Waite had been managing alcohol dependency during portions of the production, something he became more publicly candid about in later years, long after the show had ended. He stayed through the entire run of the series, but the personal discipline that required, showing up to scenes that asked him to embody steadiness and reliability during periods when he was privately fighting something significant, was a different kind of challenge than anything written into the scripts. He later became an ordained minister, and the religious dimension of the Walton family's life, which had always been a quiet but consistent thread running through the show, seemed to deepen in personal meaning for him rather than existing purely as professional material. He worked consistently in television and film after the series ended and remained connected to the Waltons' legacy through reunion productions and public appearances until his death in 2014 at the age of 85. The younger cast members carried their own invisible burdens, different in kind from what their older colleagues were managing, but no less real. Mary McDonough, who played Erin Walton across all 9 seasons, has spoken publicly in the years since about the body image pressures she experienced as a young actress on the show. She developed serious health issues connected to those pressures that stayed with her for years after production wrapped. Growing up on screen in front of a national audience, in a show that was specifically and deliberately about wholesome American family life, created a specific kind of scrutiny for the young cast members that nobody in the production had designed any mechanism to help them navigate. Judy Norton, who played Mary Ellen Walton through the entire run, carried a version of the same experience. The particular difficulty of growing up publicly, of being watched and beloved as a specific kind of character, while simultaneously being a real person trying to work out who that person was outside the role. She has been candid across various interviews over the years about the complicated relationship between the character she played weekly and the actual life she was living during those years of production. What all of these departures, absences, and private struggles reveal, taken together, is something about what sustained creative work actually costs the people doing it, and about how rarely the audience watching factors those costs into the warmth they feel sitting with a beloved show. The Waltons built its reputation and its cultural staying power on depicting the resilience of ordinary people under real pressure. The actors who built that reputation were themselves under real pressure that the show never depicted. Richard Thomas came back for the reunion movies. Michael Learned came back. The reunion productions that aired through the 1980s and into the 90s reassembled much of the original cast for stories that followed the Walton family across later decades. And those productions carried their own particular quality. The genuine warmth of people who had been through something significant together and found, after time and distance, and the complicated feelings that follow any long professional relationship, that the connection between them had survived all of it. The show premiered in September of 1972, reached the top of the Nielsen ratings in its early seasons, won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Series, and ran for 9 full seasons before its final episode aired in 1981. Earl Hamner Jr. created all of it from his own childhood memories of growing up in Schuyler, Virginia, and watched it become something considerably larger than any single creative vision can fully account for. The family he invented out of his own past gave a generation of American viewers something they were actively looking for during the 1970s: stability, continuity, the image of people who stayed. What it cost the people who played that family is a harder, quieter, and more honest story than the one the Goodnight scenes told. The Waltons spent 9 seasons making the case that a family is most itself when it refuses to let go of each other during the hard years. So what does it actually mean that the people who built that family kept leaving, kept struggling with things the show never put on screen, and kept coming back anyway? Not because the production required it, but because something about what they had made together was genuinely worth returning to. And if the real story of the Waltons includes all of the departures and the private costs alongside the warmth that made it beloved, does that make everything the show said about family feel more true? Or does it complicate it in ways that are harder to sit with than a simple goodnight? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this unveil, smash that like button, comment, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales, and hit the bell so you never miss a drop. Want more? Check out another one of our videos. Thanks for watching.